Good evening. Thank you, Ken, very much. Rich Kenzie is a good friend, but he's not just my good friend. I think he's a good friend to anybody who has been involved with him. He's the kind of friend that reaches out and wants to know more about you. He's engaged in everything that you do. He wants to know about your family, your cousins, your nieces. He truly gives totally of himself whenever he involves himself in a friendship. And so I've always been happy to call Rich a friend for the last 20 or so years. Because he is so engaged in your life, the stories he shares about his own life typically aren't very selfish. He talks about his family, he talks about his mother, and he makes great jokes and keeps you laughing. So that's why I think a lot of us were stunned to learn of some of the difficulties Rich was having with his lungs. And then to have it progress so quickly, and maybe we didn't realize, because Rich was always asking about us and not telling us about himself. As he moved forward and progressed through his lung disease, as he went on to oxygen, as he got onto the lung donor recipient list, and then to so quickly be in surgery was a stun, at least to me and my family, and I think for a lot of us. So not only is Rich a good friend, he has also become our miracle friend for how quickly he has recovered, the great work he's doing, and his desire to share that story in a way to praise God. So I'm proud to be here tonight to introduce Rich Kenzie.
Thank you very much, Wes. Am I on? Am I hot? Good. Well, thank you very much for coming. I'm so glad that you're here to hear my journey. There was a man who was a devout man of God, and he was out fishing in the ocean. Suddenly a storm comes along, and he's capsized, and he's bobbing in the water, treading water ferociously. And a boat comes along and offers to rescue him. And he says, no, I'm a devout man of God. I believe that God will save me. So the boat sails by. A couple of minutes later, a helicopter comes. It's the Coast Guard. Ladder drops down. The Coast Guard reaches out, and the man says, no, I'm a devout man of God. I believe that God will save me. So the Coast Guard flies away. A couple of minutes later, another boat comes by. Same thing, and the man gives the same reaction. I'm a devout man of God. God will save me. Well, the man drowns. He gets to heaven, and he goes storming past St. Peter right up to the throne of God and says, God, I can't believe this. I'm a devout man of God, and here I prayed, and you didn't save me. God said, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What more do you want? Isn't that true in life, though? A lot of times, we see things that are right in front of us, but we don't realize that the answers are there. Again, thank you for coming. I want to share my story with you. It's taken me a while to be able to stand up and share my story. After spending 3 months in hospital, including 20 days in ICU, literally staring death in the face, I do have some PTSD issues. So I guarantee I'm going to do my best to get through this without losing it, but I probably will a couple times, but that's okay. Because I think it's more impactful and it's the reality of what I went through. And after all, click, how come this is not working? Oh, I got to turn it on first, don't I? See, mentally challenged here. Hang on, there we go. Caught in a storm. Okay, so it's the medicine. I always blame it on the medicine, the transplant medicine. The reality is that I've been on an incredible journey, and that God has worked wonders in my life from the very beginning. So, like I said, if I do lose it, Jesus wept too, so it's okay. Tonight, I want you to know that God loves you unconditionally, no matter what stage you are in your life or where you are. If you're a believer, my prayer tonight is that God will touch you through the power of the Holy Spirit and renew your strength. If you don't know Him, then my prayer tonight is that you will get to know Him and His great love for you. No matter what you have done or where you are in your life, God loves you. I love this. Just as a shattered mirror still reflects your image, God still sees you in all your brokenness. So I'm going to start at the very, very beginning. That's a very good place to start. There's a song in there somewhere. I was born in Royston, Hertfordshire, England. Royston is a small market town. It's about 40 miles due north of London, in the ancient region of East Anglia, which was settled by the Romans up until 400 AD, when the Anglo-Saxons came and took over. Now, times were tough in the early 70s. There's me with my mom. My mom's still alive. She'll be 90 this year. God bless her. Times were tough in the 1970s in the UK, and my father was actually laid off from his middle management position. If Pastor Dennis was here, he'd love that bow tie. At a parachute manufacturing company. He'd been out of work for about 4 months, and the Canadian division of his company offered him a position. Dad had traveled to Canada about once a year and was familiar with the country, so we packed up and moved to Canada for what was supposed to be a 3-year endeavor. This was my first experience of moving, and I hated it. I'd been very active in football or soccer in England, had a great group of friends. All my family was still there. I moved to Ontario, Canada, no organized soccer, so I get thrown on ice skates at 11 years old. Now, Canadian kids are born with a stick in their hand and skates on their feet. I also had the challenge of trying to adjust to a Canadian school system, which was a struggle. Believe it or not, there was a language barrier. Kids could not understand me with my accent, so I had to kind of fake the Canadian accent. There was also different words for items. I remember the most embarrassing one. I think it was the very first day I was in school, and I had my pencil, and I made a mistake, and I asked somebody, could you please pass me the rubber? Not realizing that has a totally different connotation in Canada than it does in England. But this was also my first exposure to the true meaning of a relationship with Jesus. At the age of 14, I attended a vacation Bible school and first accepted Jesus. Although I didn't really follow through with a personal relationship at that time, the seed had been planted. I managed to adapt, and finally, after about 3 years, came to terms with the fact that the Canadian move was permanent. I had several jobs during school, including a lucrative grass cutting business, caddying at a golf course where my brother worked, working in my father's business. But it was my first real job that changed my life forever. A new hamburger franchise had arrived in town, and everybody was raving how you could get a fries, hamburger, and a Coke for under $1. So I hopped on my bike to see what this wonderful place was, and I was enamored by the strawberry milkshakes and double-decker hamburger with special sauce. So, it's just not working again. What did I do now? Did the battery die, maybe? The light's not on. There we go. Yes, you guessed it. In those days, McDonald's was actually an excellent training ground for the real workplace. They stressed something called QSC, which is quality, service, and cleanliness. No customers to stand at the counter for longer than 2 minutes. If you were late for work, 5 minutes or more 3 times, you were gone. It was actually like being in the Army. But it was a great work culture that stuck with me for my 40 years of working. But the most significant life event that happened to me at McDonald's was a blind date. My friend Lisa worked with me at McDonald's, and my senior prom was coming up, and Lisa and I decided we were going to go together just as friends. She didn't have a date, I didn't have a date. I wasn't actually even really thinking about it at the time. I was busy working. So a couple weeks go by, and she comes to me and says, you know what? I started dating a guy, so I'm going to go to the prom with him. Like, okay, no big deal. She said, but I do have a cousin that lives in Cheektowaga, which is just outside of Buffalo. So I said, well, let me see a picture first. So she pulled out one of those proverbial wallet-sized pictures that we all had in those days, right? With the writing on the back, love you forever, whatever it is. And I took one look at that, I know, look at those hideous glasses and cheesy mustache. I took one look at that picture and said, sure. So what started out as a blind date and 4 years of dating turned into a 34-year marriage to my beautiful wife, Patty. Sorry, don't get it. All thanks to a Big Mac. There we are, look at that. The woman never changes. The Bible says, an excellent wife who can find. She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. I couldn't have done it without Patty. I decided to take what's called a gap year after high school. At the time in Canada, there was actually a grade 13. If you wanted to go to a four-year university, you had to do grade 13. They've since done away with that. And I'd actually been in school in England since I was 4 years old full-time. I'd had 2 extra years of school, and I got to be honest, I was a terrible student. I had the brains for it, I just didn't have the attention span. So I decided I was going to take a year off, and then I was going to become a vet. Don't ask me why I wanted to be a vet. Something I wanted to do since I was young. But then I started working at a customs brokerage company in Fort Erie, Ontario, which is across from Buffalo. And that's what companies that do all the payment of the duty and taxes for goods coming into the country. So I was rapidly promoted 2 years later, moved to a different company, and by that time I was making a whopping $19,000 a year. Any thoughts of university and becoming a vet had long gone. Patty and I were married in 1985 and moved to Saskatoon. Now imagine a young 20-year-old girl from the city of Buffalo, New York, moving to the middle of the Canadian prairies. We lived in Saskatoon for about a year and a half and managed to survive minus 45-degree weather. Now, one of the things you do when you get married, we all do it, you have these grandiose plans. We got married, we said we're going to wait 5 years to have kids. Then we're going to buy a house. We're going to have a picket fence and a dog and a cat, 2.5 kids. Well, 7 months after we were married, Patty said, I'm pregnant. So, needless to say, God had other plans. So, Rachel, our oldest daughter, was born November the 1st at Grace Hospital in Saskatoon. So I think she has the distinction of being the only person other than hockey players living in Pittsburgh born in Saskatoon. In 1987, we moved to Winnipeg, Manitoba. We lived there for 18 months, which is a year and a half too long. Then we moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, where our daughter Jessica was born in 1989 and our son Philip in 1991. So life plodded along. You get the normal ups and downs of marriage, raising 3 kids, paying taxes, trying to stay ahead in the dog-eat-dog world of corporate life. For a time, we owned a franchise selling everything to do with backyard feeding of birds. It was a struggle, but we learned some very valuable life skills. Owning a business is certainly not for the faint of heart. In 1996, I moved to a small customs brokerage firm in Vancouver that was handling all the Canadian imports for a company called RPS, or Roadway Package Service. RPS was an offshoot of Roadway Trucking, and they were headquartered in Moon Township, just over by the airport. I began traveling extensively throughout the U.S., and in April of 1998, we moved to Pittsburgh. Shortly after our move, RPS was purchased by FedEx and is known today as FedEx Ground. In 2003, I actually went to work directly for FedEx Ground in the sales capacity and been there ever since. And I'm so grateful I work for a company like FedEx who was so good to me during my time off. Now, I'm sharing all this with you because this was, without a doubt, all part of God's plan for my life. There's absolutely no question that God put me in Pittsburgh for a reason. He knew that I was going to need a lung transplant. He also knew that Pittsburgh is ranked number 3 in the nation for lung transplants. And that Dr. DeCuna, who performed my surgery, is not one of the most renowned and respected surgeons in the U.S., but the world. He knew my donor was going to be, and he knew that his or her lungs were going to be a perfect match for me. This is how God works in our life. Psalm 139:16 says, Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. God created time for man. But you know, time just goes so fast. Kids are in kindergarten 1 minute, then high school, then college, and married. We all experience it. You're in the Giant Eagle and you bump into somebody and you say, what grade is Jimmy in now? And you find out that he's a senior in college. You're like, where did the time go? You're watching a movie and you go on to IMDb and say, I can't believe this movie came out in 1999. That's 20 years ago. Titanic is 22 years old already, the movie. And Back to the Future came out almost 35 years ago. When you think about that, that's how fast time goes. Well, time went along for me, and I was always healthy except for the occasional cold, no surgeries except tonsillitis, some minor knee surgery from years of playing hockey and soccer and coaching soccer. In 2012, the year I was about to turn 50, I realized that I got that dad bod. I got an extra 40 pounds piled on me, so I was going to do P90X and lose weight. And I did it. I managed to make it through. I did the eating plan and everything. I lost 40 pounds. I was in the best shape of my life. I even had a six-pack for the first time since I was a teenager. And I was so proud of the fact that I wasn't on any medicine. You know what they say, pride comes before the fall. I like to joke that I should have just stayed fat and lazy. In March of 2013, I started to get this nagging cough, especially on exertion. So I went to the doctor. My regular doctor wasn't working that day, so I saw a fill-in doctor, and he said, I think you just have a cold. Just take over-the-counter cold medicine. If it's not gone in a couple of weeks, come back and see us. Well, it wasn't gone. So I went back and I saw my PCP, Dr. Brohlman, and he said, you need to get a chest x-ray. Okay? And this was a Friday. I distinctly remember the next day, it was a beautiful spring day, and we were taking our dog up to Hartwood Acres for a run. My phone rang, and it was Dr. Brohlman. And he said, I see something on your x-ray, something on your lungs. And I was like, you know what the next words are. Is it cancer, right? That's what you always think. He said, no, I'm pretty sure it's not cancer. He said, but I want you to go and get a CT scan and refer you to a pulmonologist. So I went for a CT scan, and it showed some issues in my lungs called honeycombing. And essentially what happens is that the pockets of your lungs, the air sacs, start to open up. And it looks like a honeycomb, like you can see in the slide. So I went through a battery of tests for various autoimmune lung diseases, asthma, tried a whole battery of different medicines, no luck. Finally, I was diagnosed with something called idiopathic hypersensitivity. Remember that, you get a... Essentially, this means that the lungs have been reacting to something in the environment or due to an undisclosed autoimmune. Now, I'd never smoked a day in my life. Always ate healthy, exercised. So there was absolutely no known cause for this, hence the word idiopathic. By October of 2017, I went on supplemental oxygen. I was on 2 liters of oxygen at rest and 6 liters on exertion. In January of 2018, I began to develop what's called PF, or pulmonary fibrosis. Now, PF is basically a death sentence. It's where the air sacs become so scarred and stiff that they're no longer able to absorb oxygen. I was diagnosed with a very rapid and severe case. PF is irreversible. I got progressively worse, and by February, I was on 8 liters of oxygen at rest and 15 on exertion. It was at this point that the pulmonologist recommended that I go for a lung transplant. Now, Patty and I were both shocked because we'd been in discussion with one of my pulmonologists, and his view was I might need a transplant about 4 or 5 years out. So to hear those words that you need one now was obviously very shocking. Now, I have to explain something to you that a lot of people don't understand. A lung transplant is actually the least successful of all the organ transplants. If in this room I had 100 people today that had a lung transplant, and I asked them to come back in the room a year from now, 75 people are going to walk in this room. If I ask them to walk in this room 5 years from now, only 25 people are going to walk in the room. Now, I plan to beat those odds. There's people that I know that have been 15, 20, 25 years. If you do what you're supposed to do, take your medicine, get your exercise, get your water, you stand a much better chance. So Patty and I discussed the transplant at length. I really had no choice at that point. I had become so bad, I could barely make it in the house from the car, even with oxygen. It took me 45 minutes to take a shower and get dressed in the morning. I was grasping at straws, and I went to see my thoracic surgeon, Dr. Lamb, who'd done acid reflux surgery on me in 2013, and I said, Doc, here I was thinking I'm going to live to be 85 or 90. He's like, whoa, hold on. He goes, nobody is guaranteed life. He said, heaven forbid, he said, I could die in a car accident tomorrow or from an aneurysm. He said, if you have a chance to extend your life by 2, 5, 10, 15 years, why wouldn't you take that chance? The Bible clearly says that our days belong to God. So we made the decision to pursue transplant, not even knowing if I'd be a candidate. Not everyone is a candidate for transplant. It's a very odd situation. You actually have to be sick enough for a transplant, but healthy enough for a transplant to go through the surgery. It's a very tough surgery. After my insurance approved the preliminary test for transplant, I was assigned to the transplant clinic at UPMC Presby. I went through a battery of tests. I remember getting 26 vials of blood taken out of me. It looked like a Keith Richards party with all the needles and everything all over the place. CT scans, x-rays, heart catheterization, psychological assessments, financial for the insurance, classes with Patty, who would be the primary punching bag. I'm a caregiver. Mid-March, I was approved by the team for a double lung transplant. It would be another 30 days before I was officially listed with UNOS, which is the organization that lists you. So I was officially listed on April 24th. Now, during this time, you have to hang by the phone, have to answer those unknown numbers. No, I don't want to buy a condo in Florida, So it was May the 6th, which is Sunday evening. It's 11:15 at night, just getting into bed, and the phone rings. My home phone number. Now, only 2 people have my home phone number. It was UPMC and my mother. And my mother wasn't calling me at 11:15 at night. So the transplant nurse was on the other end of the line. She says, Dr. DeCuna has a potential set of lungs for you. So that's when it kind of hit you, like, this is the real deal. Now, the nurse explained to me that they're called increased risk lungs. This means they come from a donor who's had a high-risk lifestyle, such as a drug user or a prisoner, or it could be from an older person too. So Patty and I kind of went back and forth with each other, and we made the decision that we were going to go down with a lung transplant because Dr. DeCuna had assured us he wasn't going to put any bad lungs in. So we headed down to Presby, and I was admitted to the 9th floor to wait for the final decision. So this is like 1 o'clock in the morning, just waiting. Many times you get what's called a dry run. This is because all organ donations come from deceased donors, with the exception of kidney and liver, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the organs had not been removed and needed to be inspected. So organs from a deceased donor always come from a donor that is declared brain dead. This is because the organs actually begin to deteriorate very shortly after death. By 6 a.m., I was notified that the lungs appeared to be viable, and I was moving down to pre-op. 7 o'clock, my doctor, DeCuna, the surgeon, came by and said he wanted to triple check the lungs for any more potential damage or anything, make sure they're 100% good to go. He came back about 20 minutes later, and he said he's satisfied with the condition of the lungs and proceed with the surgery. Soon after, I was prepped, wheeled into the OR, and despite all the happy juice that I had, I remember being overwhelmed by the number of instruments and all the lights in the operating room. That's the last thing I remember until about 36 hours later on the Tuesday afternoon when my son-in-law Luke was standing on my left side holding my hand, and Rachel, my daughter, was on the right side. I'd endured a 7.5-hour surgery that, in typical Dr. DeCuna fashion, in his brevity, he told my wife, surgery went well. Any questions? That's all he said. I obviously found that out afterwards. I was actually too swollen to be closed up, and I had this wonderful yellow surgical wrap that I affectionately called saran wrap wrapped around me. And I got to tell you, that freaked me out. I didn't like that at all. On Wednesday, I had an additional 3-hour surgery to be closed up with 78 metal staples, and I have a beautiful clamshell scar that looks something like this. I didn't want to put an actual picture of me up and have you run out of the room. So this is the way they cut you underneath your breast, and they actually pop you up like a car hood. And that was Dr. DeCuna's words, not my words. He was very, very clinical when he said that to me. I was intubated with events, and I was unable to communicate other than hand signals and eye movements. This was extremely frustrating for somebody like me not being able to talk. My oldest daughter, Rachel, was actually the best at interpreting my hand signals and eye blinks. I tried to write some things down, but it was just totally illegible. Now, this is where it got really kind of crazy for me. I was laying there the one day. It was about 3 days after the surgery. Even though I had new lungs, I was intubated with a tube. I was struggling to breathe. It was like almost like I was suffocating, even though I had these new lungs, and I had to learn how to breathe all over again. And I had this pain in my side from where the chest tubes were. And I was so incredibly thirsty because you can't drink. And all they give you are these lousy green sponges to moisten your lips with, and they're terrible. And I laid there thinking about this, and in my misery I was thinking, why? And then I got to thinking, this is how it was for Christ on the cross. How he struggled to breathe. And how he was thirsty. And I thought, he suffered 100 more times for me, 100 more times than this. For me, a hopeless, unworthy sinner. And I stopped feeling sorry for myself. After 3 days, I was weaned from the vent, and I was extubated, and I was able to breathe again with limited oxygen. And then I started to learn how to use my new lungs, and it was an incredible feeling. This was my first day when I moved up to the 9th floor at Presby. And I was doing great. I had some moderate rejection. So they put me on a steroid to knock that out, to treat it. I think it was a 3 out of 4 scale in the rejection. And the best way to describe this, because people ask me, rejection, I like to use the splinter example. If you get a slither or a splinter in your finger and you leave it for a while, it starts to fester. So that's how it is with an organ. What happens is, despite it being as close a match as possible from the donor, your body still sees it as a foreign object, and it's constantly trying to attack it and kill it. That's regardless of what organ you get transplanted. Even for skin grafts, it can be the same. So this is why they give you all sorts of immunosuppressant medicine to take that away, and try to suppress that. On May 29th, it was determined that I had what was called antibody rejection, and they put me on another process called plasmapheresis. And essentially what they do, they put a port in my neck, they take all your plasma out, and they replace it with albumin. And this is over a 16-day process. So this seemed to be working. I got real tired from it, got cold, but didn't really have any side effects. June 7th, which is exactly 1 month after my transplant, it was about 8:30 at night, and I was eating cottage cheese for my snack at night. I'd finally been allowed to eat solid food after a swallow test. I leaned over to throw the container in the garbage, and all of a sudden, I could not breathe. And it was a horrible feeling. I was gasping for air. I'm ringing the call bell, like, nurse, I can't breathe. And she said, what? So they come in, and the nurse ended up coding me. And within minutes, the room was full of medical staff. Like, you've never seen so many people pile into a room within a minute. There was respiratory people, nurses, and doctors, and all kinds of people. So within about 10 minutes, they said, we're taking you down to CTICU, back to CTICU. My oxygen saturation level had dropped to 68%. Normally it should be obviously close to 100%, 98, 99, 100%. My heart rate was at 167, and my BP was 180 over 100. I remember one of the doctors saying to me, you're pretty much on the verge of a stroke, so just lay there and remain calm. Okay. Well, thanks for telling me that. So I was whisked back to CTICU, and once I was there, I was put on really high-flow oxygen. And I don't really remember what happened for about a day and a half, except I woke up intubated again with a tube back down me. June 13th, they took the tube out and they put a trach in me, which I bear the scar proudly. and what's called a GJ tube in my stomach for feeding, because they try not to feed you when you have a lung transplant in those situations, because that can actually cause rejection. But from the GJ tube, I actually developed sepsis, and I got really sick. I was pretty much on the brink of death. So I had a nurse, Joe, who was I thought he was a young hotshot at first, because he was always bragging about all kinds of different things with all his fellow nurses. But he ended up being one of the best nurses I had. He stayed by my side that whole night. I looked at him and said, "Joe, am I going to die?" He's like, "You're not going to die, brother." He goes, "I got you." June 22nd, I was finally transferred back from CTICU to the transplant ward, 9th floor at Presby. I didn't eat or drink for 30 days. I lost 50 pounds. I lost all ability to walk. I hated seeing the burgundy, blue, and green shirts walk in my room, because that's occupational therapy and PT, physical therapy. They were trying to get me up and get me walking, and I hated it. I just couldn't do it. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. I began to sink into a very deep state of depression I'd never experienced before. I felt so alone. I had a room with windows all the way around at the end. The nurses jokingly called me. They said I was in the penthouse suite. I had a perfect view of the Cathedral of Learning. In Shenley Park, I could see people outside enjoying life. It felt like I'd never be outside again. I would dream every night about being outside of the hospital and running and walking with no oxygen and being free. But every time I ended up back in the hospital in my dream, and of course, that's where I woke up, in my hospital bed. We'd have rainy days, and the nurses would come and go, "You're not missing much today, Mr. Kenzie. It's raining outside." And I'd say, "Do you know how much I give to be sitting on my back porch right now, listening to the rain, the thunder and the lightning, and smelling the rain?" Slowly, I continued to improve, and there was talk of moving me over to Montefiore for rehab. However, I was still having trouble standing, even with 2 people helping me. It was a struggle. They wanted me to walk to the nurses' station and back, unassisted, which is 150 feet. They might as well have been asking me to walk to Philadelphia and back. I finally made it to the nurses' station one day and rang the bell, 75 feet. I turned around, couldn't make it all the way back. A couple of days later, the rehab doctor was coming to assess me to move to Montefiore. So I knew that morning was do or die. I wanted to get over rehab so bad. My cardio rehab team came in. I remember Dave, this big guy that really, really pushed me a lot, and I am so thankful for him for doing that. Stopped by around 9 a.m., and I got to be honest, that morning I was feeling pretty miserable. I didn't think I was going to make it, but I did. I made it 75 feet, and I rang the bell again. The nurse's station, I turned around, got to make it another 75 feet back. Start going. Literally 10 feet before my room, I buckled. My PTs grabbed me to stop me from falling. I got in the room, threw my pillow around, said some plumbing words. I was crying, but they were tears of anger. I was so mad that I hadn't made it the whole 150 feet. In comes the rehab doc to assess me. He does a series of strength tests, and he looks at the rehab team and asks if I walked 150 feet, unassisted. Waiting for the inevitable, I looked sheepishly down at the bed, and to my surprise, all 3 of them said, "Yep." No mention of me collapsing at 140 feet. They knew how hard I wanted to get out of there. And they didn't lie. I did walk 150 feet. The doctor was still a little skeptical. He goes, "Well, he says, I don't know if you can handle a 3-a-day intense rehab." Now, I've been in sales all my life. And I've always been top in sales because I can talk my way out of most things. So I used my master sales strategy and my Jedi mind tricks. I said, "Doc, take a look at that picture on the wall. Those are my grandkids. They're my motivation for getting out of here. My granddaughter keeps asking, when can she play with granddad again? And I want to get out of here. So you send me to rehab, and I will work my butt off." So he said he'd look over all the notes and speak to the PT team and get back to me. About an hour later, he comes back and says, "Well, we're going to move you to rehab as soon as we get a bed." That's like the kiss of death in the hospital, because hospital time, when are you going to get a bed, right? So 3 days later, July 18th, I moved to Montefiore. Sorry. And I was ready for rehab. Now, they assessed me and gave me a target of July 30th for release, which was 12 days of rehab. Now, you have to do it 3 times a day, and normally what happens is they give you 6 days and take a day off. I absolutely refused to take a day off. There's no way I was standing in this hospital any longer. I was getting out of here. I actually got the Champion of the Week award, and by the end of rehab, I was able to stand up on my own off the wheelchair and walk 800 feet unassisted. I was released on July 30th. I cannot say enough about my staff at UPMC Presby. They're phenomenal. Every time I go back for tests, I stop in and I see them, bring them donuts, say hello, and they actually love to see it. But throughout my process, I never lost my faith in God. There were many moments that I had in hospital. I did have hallucinations due to the drugs, but I was fully aware that I was seeing things. I knew that in my mind that these things weren't right. Like when I was crawling on a floor of chocolate and sinking into it, or surrounded, this is a weird one, but it's true, surrounded by a team of Asian doctors trying to feed me oranges. And then there was a time when there was a monkey behind my door. Patty came in to see me and said, "Do you see that monkey behind the door?" I said, "Don't tell the doctors this because I think they're going to admit me to Western Psych next." I did see a monkey, in all honesty. But I knew at those times that it was the medicine playing with my mind. But there was also times when I was 100% lucid and awake, and I clearly felt somebody holding my hand. There's no one in the room with me, and I was fully awake and aware of what was happening. But it didn't freak me out. It was a source of comfort. And other things that happened in our life that were just God moments. Patty's work had been reduced. Her hours at the company she was working at had been reduced. And this had put an additional financial strain on us because I was already on short-term disability. And she went from 40 hours down to 10 hours a week. And we were talking, and I said, "Look, we'll get through this somehow." A couple of days later, she comes home, and in the mailbox, she had a check from actually a cousin-in-law in Florida. Said, "I was thinking of you," and the amount of the check was about as much as making up those hours that she was going to be missing. It was just incredible. It was just an answered prayer. I prayed before every single test, prayed that the rejection was gone. It was gone. I prayed that the infection would be cleared up. It was cleared up. I specifically remember being down one afternoon. I was struggling with my oxygen levels. My blood was not good. I was just miserable. I was feeling really down and questioning why I went through this whole process. I was really in need of a visitor that day. It was a Wednesday, middle of the week, and Patty wasn't due to come in till the evening. And I just prayed that God would send somebody in to see me. Literally an hour later, in walked Pastor Dennis. Totally unplanned visit. That's the pastor that used to be here at our church. He was on his way home from the Erie area. He was driving down 79. He said, "I suddenly felt this urge to keep driving and come to see you." It was a true answer to prayer and just what I'd needed. The support that we had from friends and family, unbelievable. And everyone here knows that, if you helped on the journey, I thank you so much for being there for me and for Patty and our family. It means so much to us. It was just incredible. The ladies of the church, what you did for Patty, just unbelievable. Thank you so much. Now, some of you may be wondering why the Pomegranates and Grapefruit story. Let me tell you a little bit about why I came up with this. When you get an organ transplant, there are certain anti-rejection drugs that you have to take for life. And there are certain foods that you can no longer eat when you're on these drugs because they interact with the drug. One in particular is grapefruit. Now, I loved grapefruit. Not everybody's a grapefruit fan, but I actually loved grapefruit prior to my transplant. I would have half a grapefruit every morning for breakfast and frequently drank grapefruit juice. Pomegranate is also a food that interferes with the medicine, although it was not as concerned with missing that. Every day I was lamenting not having grapefruit. I was craving it, compounded by the fact that I couldn't eat or drink anything else. The thirst was incredible, only relieved by those lousy sponges. I began to question why I had this transplant in the first place, because all these things I had to give up. I couldn't have sushi anymore, which is one of my favorite foods. Couldn't go to buffets or have undercooked steaks or take a cruise because of the risk of infection or foodborne illness. I was feeling just sorry for myself. And that afternoon I fell into a deep sleep, and I had a dream where God clearly told me that I had to give something up in order to get something in return. The giving up grapefruit was a very small price to pay for a new lease on life. I woke up feeling quite humbled, and I picked up my Bible, and I decided to flip open a random chapter like you do, and I happened to land in the book of Haggai. Now, I have to be honest, I've never read a single verse in this book before. I don't even think I knew it existed before. So I began to read at chapter 2, and when I got to verse 19, I literally got goosebumps. Is there any seed left in the barn? Until now, the vine and the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have not borne fruit. From this day on, I will bless you. Wow. Needless to say, I got the message loud and clear. I'd like to encourage you that if you're not a donor to sign up tonight. CORE is here in the narthex and can help you register. There are numerous myths and misconceptions about organ donation. You can actually be a live donor for a kidney, liver, bone marrow, and of course blood. One of the biggest myths is if the hospital sees I'm a donor, they're not going to save my life. Well, let me tell you something. First of all, that flies in the face of the Hippocratic Oath of doctors. And second of all, do you really think if you're in a really bad accident, the first thing the doctor's going to do is rifle through your wallet or your purse to see if you're an organ donor? Think about it. If you're still concerned about putting on your license, you can actually go to www.registerme.org, which is on my cards out there in the narthex. I'm too old to donate. That's not true. Last year, a 92-year-old man donated his liver to a 68-year-old woman. And I said the liver looked like the liver of a 50-year-old. My religion prohibits me from doing so. Most religions encourage donation as a final act of love and generosity. I have a medical condition. While most organs are eligible despite illness, the transplant team will determine eligibility. Or my family will have to pay for the donation. There's no cost to the donor family. Everything's covered under the recipient's insurance. There are others that Keith from CORE will educate you on if you want to know that tonight. Every weakness you have is an opportunity for God to show his strength. I question why God put me through this fire, but I believe it's to tell the story of how he led me through this, to encourage people you can face trials no matter what. By depending on God. Maybe you're not a believer in God, and I understand that. But there's family, there's friends, there's a network that can get you through. But most of all, depending on God will get you through. People call me brave. They say, you're an inspiration, you're a miracle man, the strongest person I know. What they don't see is what is in the inside. The guilt of a body that failed before its time, despite me not doing anything to cause it. I never smoked. I lived a healthy lifestyle. The survivor guilt. Remember that somebody had to die to give me life. There's a family who I hope to meet someday that's grieving the loss of their loved one. People say I'm a hero. I'm not a hero. My donor's my hero. I prefer to think of it as being a survivor. We're all survivors. It's human nature. If we're drowning, we clamor for the surface of the air. If we're choking, we do all we can to keep breathing. I did what I had to do to stay alive. And the attitude of still wanting to be here and be alive is 90% of the battle. See, if you're donating an organ, you're not just giving. An organ is just cells and blood and tissue. You're giving life to somebody. Getting back to my original thought on time, a transplant puts new perspective on life. Things are not such a big deal anymore. I value time with my family. Social media is just a giant time-sucking vacuum that takes away hours of the day. Try using the app on the phone that monitors how much time you spend on it. You'll be shocked. Work is work. I returned October 1st full-time. I'm fortunate enough to work for a great company that has great benefits and understands my situation. But I put my hours in and then my work is over, I'm done. Work does not define me, nor should it define you. If you're to die tomorrow, heaven forbid, you'd be replaced and life would go on. Spend time doing what you love, doing and engaging with your family. Most important, if you don't have a personal relationship with God in your life, take time to consider a personal relationship with Him. I can tell you that things happened to me, my illness, were not coincidence. Since the Garden of Eden, we're all stamped with what's called the Adamic nature, that is sin, and a mortal body begins to decay from birth. But there's hope. Hope in our Savior Jesus Christ, the one who died on the cross for us. His pain was intense, and He could have stopped it by just calling a league of angels, but He saw you and He died for you because He loves you. Christ is the ultimate organ donor. He gave His heart for you. There's a Japanese proverb that says, fall down 7 times, get up 8. God's the one who can pick you up. It doesn't matter what your sin is in the past. God has this giant chalkboard where all your sins are noted but totally erased through the blood of His Son, Jesus. Jesus is a myth. It's just stories. It's fairy tales, right? Well, if the Bible's a fairy tale, why is it banned in 50 countries? Where Grimm's fairy tales is not. Every week, more and more historical evidence of Jesus' existence and biblical events come to light through archaeological discoveries. Letters written just 25 years after his death by St. Paul. The Gospels just 40 years after his death. Whereas in contrast, stories about King Arthur happened 400 years after his supposed existence. I understand that not everybody here has that same feeling that I do, but I'm so compelled to share this story because of how God has worked from day one to now. And I'd just like to thank you very much for coming out and listening tonight. I hope that it inspires you. I hope you're motivated by it to realize that God can get you through anything. And if you're facing a major crisis or major surgery in your life, I know there's some people here tonight that are actually facing the same thing I am. Trust me, if I can do it, you can do it.